The playoffs are heating up, and you can still play along on Underdog Fantasy. Whether it's their pick'em game, where you pick higher or lower on 2 to 5 of your favorite players' stats, or their fan-favorite draft games, there's plenty of fun to be had, and maybe you'll win some money when you do. Head over to Underdog Fantasy's app or website to check it out now, where they match your first-time deposit up to $100.
From your favorite source for Chicago White Sox talk, delivering news, interviews, analysis, and more. This is the Sox Machine podcast with your hosts, Jim Margulis, James Fegan, and Josh Nelson.
Thanks, Rob, and welcome to a new Sox Machine Live. I'm your host, Josh Nelson, joined by the managing editor of SoxMachine.com, Jim Margulis, and of course, our new addition that we were very excited to announce on Monday, and it's felt like he's been here already a month, Jim, James Fegan. Gentlemen, welcome. On this episode of Sox Machine Live, we'll be talking about the South Loop Stadium renderings, and every single day it seems like there's new information. We just got new information from the Chicago Sun-Times about the project 5 minutes before we started streaming, so we'll talk about that towards the end of the show. Both Baseball Prospectus and FanGraphs released their 2024 projections when it comes to the standings. So how do those look like for the Chicago White Sox? But first, we have news from the White Sox themselves. They have invited 25 now. I think James has been able to confirm 26 players. Who is getting invited to spring training camp, the 2024 edition? So a handful of pitchers here: Justin Anderson, Joe Barlow, Jake Cousins, Chad Kuhl, Jake Woodford, catcher Chucky Robinson, and guess who's back? It's Danny Mendick. I didn't give you guys time to guess. I'm sorry about that. Former Chicago Cubs great Rafael Ortega, Mark Payton still around, and of course Brett Phillips and Kevin Pillar. Those are the guys on the minor league contracts. And James, you were able to confirm before the show with us via text message, and MLB Trade Rumors also posted this as well, that Jesse Chavez is going to be joining as far as the guys at spring training camp. And on at the top of those minor league signings, you do have the other invitees that the White Sox will be bringing on from the non-40 man. So there's a lot of people are asking, hey, where's Colson Montgomery? Where's Brian Ramos on the 40-man roster? They will be there in Glendale. Jim, I know you always get excited when it comes to the non-roster invitees. So I'll start with you. Out of all the players that the White Sox are to be inviting, who's the most interesting to you?
I would say now that they acquired 2 outfielders to battle for right field and are credible right fielders, and you don't have to try to torture a functional platoon out of Brett Phillips and Rafael Ortega or Mark Payton. Kevin Pillar, I'm taking him for granted, or taking him as a given, I should say. I don't know if that's accurate, but usually when you get like above like $2 million for a minor league deal, it tends to be a given unless something terrible happens during spring training. But I think like the bullpen, there are some possibilities there. Justin Anderson, when his minor league signing was announced, he looked at his numbers and his a little bit of like Keenan Middleton-ish, in the past, he had some production, I believe for the Angels, getting some strikeouts, having some power, and then, kind of comes and goes in terms of his control. But it had been a feasible arsenal for retiring major league hitters. And given how open the White Sox bullpen competition is going to be, I think he leads what's going to be a pretty open-ended competition. I think all these guys in the right-handed pitcher column are in play, but I think Anderson struck me as a guy who could actually break camp with them and would be least surprising, I think, if he did.
So Jim's got Justin Anderson. How about you, James? When you look at the list that the White Sox are going to be inviting to spring training camp, and you'll be there, so you'll get a chance to chat with some of them, who intrigues you the most?
There's so many options. You've got Danville's own Chucky Robinson. You've got you could very easily put yourself in headspace seeing Jake Woodford throw like 60 innings this season. Always thrilling when so much of your minor league invites are composed of guys that you have DFA'd over the course of the offseason. That's like its own contingent in there. Like That's your subheading right there. I would say, well, Mendick kind of qualifies in the sense that they cleared him off their 40-man roster last year, but I think he's intriguing, and not just because like I didn't realize he'd be there until today. I mean, there's several reasons. One of them is that like the last time I talked to him is after he tore his ACL, and we're trying to like, it's a sad interview, and he's talking about going to rehab, and I didn't know how to wrap it up, so I just recalled kind of like a awkward pause and saying, "I'll see you in Arizona, man." And then like I haven't seen him since.
Turns out you're right.
Right. So it's great that like I wasn't just like awkwardly
didn't say what year.
Ending a conversation. At least in the time between that. He's interesting because when I was covering like AA years ago when he was a prospect there, I was like interviewing Dane Dunning after a start, and I got to walk through like the Birmingham locker room, and someone had crossed out his last name on his locker from Mendick and wrote Mandick, and I was like, that doesn't make his name any more silly. I don't know what the point was. Like it changed. It didn't add any humor to the name that wasn't already there, so it just seemed like a very like extraneous thing, and it's always stuck with me. And when I first saw him, it was my first prospect trip in 2017. Is in Winston-Salem, and he's just like, I think he went 3 for 4 with like 2 doubles. He's just hitting rockets every time up, but I'm like, he's the number 9 hitter, and he's 23 in A-ball. I'm not born yesterday. I'm not supposed to pay attention to this person. I just didn't acknowledge it. Like I am not gonna let 2 games of him looking good make me think what's obvious here. I just blew him off and wrote about Luis Basabe. So another opportunity to visit one of my wrongest assessments from early in my career is always good. He's someone like, obviously the defensive ceiling is higher with Nicky Lopez, and there's a whole different contractual situation where he's making $3 million and Mendick's the NRI. But the world where like Danny Mendick easily outperforms Nicky Lopez and like basically is the everyday second baseman by June is like, I don't think anyone would tell you that, and that's like a non-ridiculous result. It's sort of why like when he got let go and like it was reported like the Mets are getting him and they got all the service time of him, I always thought that was a little overblown because like they're on the level of guys where as their performances are undulating when they're good, it's like, well, it's really neat to have this useful player who contributes to winning. You don't have to think about re-signing him for 3-4 years, but when he's on the downside, he's probably a guy who's flirting between getting a non-guaranteed deal as he does right now, coming back. I don't want to like. Obviously, we probably, we didn't really watch him in the post ACL tear season, and maybe we're going to see a version of him why he's kind of bouncing around a little bit around NRI. But the last time that Danny Mendick was in a White Sox uniform, definitely the bat gives you an idea of like there's more ceiling where he could outperform offensively Nicky Lopez, because I think they're both in the under the guise of like they make good swing decisions to counteract a lack of necessarily thump most of the time. But Danny's probably shown more moderate outbursts of power where you could see him as being a 700 OPS guy or north of that more than you can imagine Lopez doing that. And maybe he becomes a regular. This is certainly not the infield picture that's locked in where you can't see someone from NRI town becoming like a starter over the course of the season.
So my follow-up question to that, and Jim, I'll pitch this question to you. Like, the White Sox DFA'd Zach Remillard, but we know like how frequent Pedro Grifol used Zach Remillard last year. And there is the whole question, like, who is going to be the backup infielder? Like, if we do assume that Paul DeYoung's the shortstop and Nicky Lopez is the second base, maybe they flip-flop during camp. Who's going to be that utility infielder? And if it's between Zach Remillard and Danny Mendick, even though Danny Mendick, to James's point, is a non-roster invitee, who would you rather have on that bench for the White Sox and have more potential, at least offensively?
Well, can you go with Lenyn Sosa?
I guess if you want to go with the door number 3 option.
Yeah, I think so. I think like he's kind of getting to the point where he's got to, show something. I think there's a case where, Paul DeYoung, Nicky Lopez will probably be every day, both because like kind of the Gavin Sheets rule of he doesn't look overmatched game to game. You just kind of get used to the week outs after a while and realize like if he's not doing anything, it'll be like a couple weeks before you realize it's nothing's adding up here. Whereas like game to game, Zach Remillard got by the same way with just looking okay in the batter's box until you realize like anytime he could bunt, he would just to get the at bat over with or try to make himself useful when it kind of gave away like maybe lack of confidence in his ability to swing the bat and make useful contact. But I think Sosa, is somebody who is poised to like, he's had a couple shots at the major league playing time. I don't know if a whole lot more time in Charlotte does good. So, I mean, if he's going to be this extra infielder who can play second and third and short in a pinch, this would be the time to start proving it is with this team when you should be able to play more than say a standard utility infielder because, whether it's because Moncada gets hurt or because Lopez isn't that good or DeYoung looks like a guy who is happy to get a major league contract this time around. There should be playing time all around. And Sosa, if he gets on a hot streak, should be able to, usurp them to start as long as he can. But I think first things first, walk before you run. Just has to like string together a series, which has been somewhat elusive for him.
On the topic of Lenyn Sosa, since Jim picked door number 3, James, if it's truly going to be a competition, I guess we can also count in Braden Shoemake, who came over in the Aaron Bummer deal from the Atlanta Braves. Part of this middle infield mix. Like with Lenyn Sosa, what did you learn about Sosa, or at least on how the White Sox coaches think of Sosa when you were covering the team last season?
His defensive gaps probably produced the most visible frustration of, I mean, that's also another wide category from last season. But I would say like in terms of like post-game clearly unhappy Pedro or maybe more demonstrations of somebody who was making, poor quick minute decisions rather than like, showing just like a physical inability to play the position type of gaffes that, tend to stick with the manager's craw a bit more. It seemed like he had an inordinate number of those. Now, ideally, if the physical tools are there and, I think at least to be a competent second baseman, he's not like a big toolsy or speedy guy, but if the tools are there, ideally that throwing to the wrong base, stuff like that, all coverage issues, some of the stuff that he had that leads to that pop-up sacrifice fly that I think nearly blew a blood vessel in Pedro Grifol's eye that night. Those should be things that should be correctable over time, not like, oh, well, eventually if you can't teach your second base prospect how to cover the right base, like that's more on you than him. So I think Lopez and Mendick are probably in this bucket of like they make good swing decisions, but maybe there's not the biggest consequences for when they make a good one. Whereas Lenyn Sosa has like a demonstrated ability across his minor league career, and at least some moments in the majors where you can see he can really impact the ball. But if you just need to kind of rein in the excessive chase that was very excessive at times, but flashed enough discipline in the minors that you would think it would translate at some point.
So the player that, again, wasn't posted here, that's going to be my list and most interesting, is reliever Jesse Chavez. And the reason is he's 40 years old, and I need someone on this White Sox roster who's older than me. This is a me thing. I have this fear of getting older. It'd be nice to have one White Sox player on the team in 2024 that's older than me, so I could feel a little younger myself. That is what I'm hoping for. Jim, you posted a picture on Twitter that he looks like Pedro's like cousin or uncle.
Cool.
No,
brother.
that was Beefloaf. Like
Yeah.
Beefloaf's like Jesse Chavez looks like the Tio that hands you beers at the party. That's right.
Yeah. No, Jesse Chavez looks like he's hip, he's cool, he's 45.
I think it's intriguing whenever a non-roster invite was like actually good last year and you just need him to do it again, as opposed to like, here's my theory about how he could be good, which is like 90% of non-roster invites.
Oh, you know what's
he was
fun?
good 2 years ago. Here's how we can fix him to get back to it. Like he just needs to stave off aging, like we all have to.
Jesse Chavez is 9 days older than Chris Getz.
Oh. So maybe Chris Getz is in the same boat as me.
Yeah.
That he's signing Jesse Chavez. So he's like me. Like, Yes, there's somebody older than me on this roster. When I look at this non-roster invitee, looking towards the bottom of the tweet that the White Sox sent, the 14 players already within the White Sox organization. And of course, Colson Montgomery's on that list. We talked about Zach Remillard. Tim Elko is always kind of funny because when I speak with people down in Ole Miss, they're a little surprised that he's having as much success as he has in the minor leagues because from them, quote, he can't hit a slider. But Tim Elko continues to mash. But on the pitching side, Nick Nastrini. Now, I kind of feel like going into the season, James, I don't know if Nastrini is going to break camp with the Chicago White Sox and be part of the starting rotation. I think Chris Getz has done enough with the 1-year deals. And when you got Tuki Tucson, and there's some question about Michael Kopech as well, if he's going to be part of the starting rotation, who I guess we could slightly entertain Garrett Crochet. However, with Nastrini coming from the Dodgers and part of the midseason trade deal, like he feels pretty confident coming into camp that he could break camp with the White Sox as one of the 5 best starting pitchers. I don't know how likely that is, but when it comes to Nastrini, do you agree that he could be like the number 6 starter for the White Sox going into the 2024 season, which means that we're going to eventually see him in the majors this season?
Yeah, I mean, I think he should definitely feel confident about the possibility of doing that. I think as a GM, you're or at least performing in a way where he looks like someone who, deserves or is one of the 5 best starting pitchers. I certainly thought he was working his way toward that toward the end of last season. I think as a GM, you build the rotation or at least build out the depth with the intention of like prevent that from being a necessity or even really a heavily considered possibility, and not just probably for service time reasons. He's probably, I think we should probably scale back the level of player that, we really worry about, like, making sure we have him in 2032 type of a situation. I think Nastrini can get there where you're a guy that you worry about service time, but I don't necessarily think that should be like a given now. It's it's still a question whether he ends up in the bullpen or not, which really changes like the question of that really quickly. But yeah, I think in terms of guys who's mixing overall ceiling and readiness, that he should be the someone who's if not really genuinely getting a real shot to be that 5th starter, someone who's trying to establish himself in the opening months as like the first guy called up and someone who can stick in the rotation long term, because it's not a group that should be too hard to crack, via performance or, the just general injury rate of starting pitchers. That seems like a very realistic goal to them.
Yeah, with Nastrini, I feel like if he's pitching well in AAA, you can make room for him. He's not blocked on his White Sox roster, especially with all the 1-year deals that they have signed, giving guys like Chris Flexen a 2nd or maybe 3rd opportunity to stick in the major leagues. So Nastrini interests me because if he does throw well in Arizona, he could be someone that gains a lot of hype that we focus on in April and May, Jim, checking in with the minor league recaps when he starts and wondering if we're going to have this conversation maybe by Memorial Day weekend of like, okay, pitcher X for the White Sox is awful. Their ERA is above 6. Should the White Sox DFA this pitcher and bring up Nastrini? Like I kind of have that feeling about him going into this season.
Yeah, I wonder, if he's starting the season in Charlotte, if there's going to be a little bit of a Davis Martin thing where the numbers are terrible in Charlotte and he comes up to Chicago and looks a lot more relaxed. Yeah. But just like they like the way the ball's coming out of his hand. They like the metrics underneath everything. And they're just like, every 320-foot fly ball is going to stay in the yard in guaranteed right field. So we'll take our chances that like he won't nibble so much or he won't get punished or he'll be able to survive what would be a double in Chicago versus a homer in Chicago. I think that's Davis Martin was kind of instructive in that regard. Pitched well in Birmingham. Numbers weren't great in Charlotte, but came to Chicago. And aside from that last start where it kind of foreshadowed the elbow problems he'd be dealing with, like he looked pretty relaxed against major league competition. And we know from Nistrini's quotes, including one of my favorites, I can't remember it verbatim, but talking about like trading from the Dodgers, like, oh, I got a clear path to the majors here.
That Ron.
Yeah.
That was his introductory Zoom.
Yeah. So, yeah, you always got confidence. So the numbers aren't great. Like if he's got like a 5.50 ERA or something like that in Charlotte, I imagine he still could get the call up just because, if he's throwing strikes or throwing enough of them and they like his velocity and like everything else, they still might give him a shot just to test that Davis Martin theory.
We're driven by the search for better. But when it comes to hiring, the best way to search for a candidate isn't to search at all. Don't search, match with Indeed. Indeed is your matching and hiring platform with over 350 million global monthly visitors, according to Indeed data, and a matching engine that helps you find quality candidates fast. Leveraging over 140 million qualifications and preferences every day, Indeed's matching engine is constantly learning from your preferences. Join more than 3.5 million businesses worldwide that use Indeed to hire great talent fast. And listeners of this show will get a $75 sponsored job credit to get your jobs more visibility at Indeed.com/Blue Wire. Just go to Indeed.com/Blue Wire right now and support our show by saying you heard about Indeed on this podcast. Indeed.com/Blue Wire. Terms and conditions apply. Need to hire? You need Indeed.
This episode is brought to you by Sleep Number. Getting a quality night's sleep is a big game changer. It can help boost your reaction time, recovery time, and performance. So get the sleep you deserve with the Sleep Number Smart Bed. It was designed for your individual sleep needs with adjustable firmness and cooling layers. It even adapts to your movements so you can sleep comfortably all night long. Sleep next level with Sleep Number Smart Beds. Only at Sleep Number stores or sleepnumber.com.
All right, so let's move over to our next topic, and that's the 2024 MLB standings projections. Our friends over at Baseball Prospectus, we'll start with them with PECOTA. That was released. This always gets people riled up because I would like the general public to understand that using their depth chart model over at Baseball Prospectus, they simulate the 2024 season 1,000 times. And the average record for the White Sox, for those that are watching on the YouTube stream, as you can see, for those listening to the podcast, 66 wins is the most common for the Chicago White Sox out of 1,000 simulations. And looking at about 685 runs scored, allowing 838 runs, which is a bit surprised with the simulation because it does raise question. Again, the White Sox are trying to be better defensively going into 2024. They're going to be focusing on preventing runs. I don't know how they're going to score more runs than last year, but they're going to try to allow fewer runs going to this season. But what I like about Baseball Prospectus, James, is that they give us this range and this wonderful graph of all the 1,000 simulations that they do. And it appears that like the best record that the White Sox have out of the 1,000 simulations is getting close to 88 wins, which that would be awesome in 2024. The worst is like 40 and 122. So a huge range here. They're going to win 40 games or they can win 88. And if I'm Baseball Prospectus, yeah, I picked 66 out of that range. When you see the graph and you see the projections from Baseball Prospectus and moving over even to FanGraphs as well, they're not much different. FanGraphs is projecting 66.6 wins. So let's round that up to 67. So both projection models, FanGraphs and PECOTA, has the White Sox at 66, 67 wins. Is that pretty spot on in how you feel before camp starts?
I said in what I thought was a casual and accepting conversation that this White Sox team could win 66 games, and I was pilloried. I was insulted for my ideas. I was treated like a leper. And now that the math is behind me, I see everyone crawling back and treating me like a rational human being again, very reluctantly. I thought I'd feel more whole now that like I'm validated, but I still just feel coursing with anger. Yes, I think it's a reasonable projection.
Okay, so now we know how James feels about it. Jim, how do you feel about the projections, both from Baseball Prospectus and FanGraphs?
It feels slightly rosy, just because the way I look at like the task at hand for Chris Getz is like, if this is 2017, like the year after the sell-off, I think that the goal is to avoid 2018, like doing that over again, because they already had that last year. Like that was, they'd have they'd have 200 lost seasons basically in 3 years. And, if they lose 100 plus, it could be 3 in a row. It could be looking at like emulating the Royals. Speaking of that, like that's kind of what they're staring down the barrel at. But like if they can get to like first year Rick Renteria, where they were feisty, they showed the ability to play the game and could win a series, but ultimately were outgunned, especially after like the last of the trades where Todd Frazier went and Jose Quintana went, and they were kind of getting by with just the dregs of what's left. And then that foreshadowed the whole collapse to come. I think, given the relatively near term possible contributions of guys like Nestrini and maybe Montgomery at the end of the year, maybe Brian Ramos at the end of the year, like you can see some upside at the end to where like maybe they can be good early, a little bit feisty at the end, and maybe the middle is a little bit of a mess when you have the bullpen as like ragged as it might be, supporting a starting rotation that looks like it might struggle to go 5. That's when you can see like, the bottom fall out from like June through like August. That's kind of what it feels like to me. So if they got through that, we've seen, Rick Renteria's first year, I believe was 65-97. Like that feels, or was it 67-95? But anyway, that territory, that felt like okay, given how much they sold off, and then they had to pay the bill the next year. That's kind of how I'm looking at, like, it looks like this should be worse, just because of the entire possibility that this roster caves in on itself because of just the all of the unproven arms that they have and all of the non-bats they have around the field, like pursuing defense to prop up a pitching staff that needs defense, but then that defense can't support itself with a lead. It feels very House of Cards-ish, and it could get ugly. So if they got out of it with a 66 win season, that would feel actually like fine, I think, because there enough had gone right to avoid like the 40 win season, which I wish Baseball Prospectus would like take the best and worst season for each team to show what the rest of the league did, just to understand how it facilitated the White Sox winning 87 or losing, or losing 120, 122 games. I'd really be curious about that. Maybe we can ask Craig Goldstein to see if he can it's another article you can spin off Pacoda coverage just to see just everything that went wrong, how perverted it gets for the other teams if the White Sox can win 87 somehow.
Yeah, which simulation number 1 through 1,000 was that? And Craig would probably respond, number 1. That was our first simulation. The White Sox go.
Stop the count.
40 and 122. Going for records.
To write up like every weird season. Like, what's the scenario where like the Dodgers win 81 games or something? Like, what crazy stuff has to happen then?
Yeah, that would be a fun post. Looking back at the Pacoda projection. So again, last year in 2023, the White Sox allowed 841 runs. They were outscored by 200 runs. They only scored 641 on the season. That's the second worst run differential in the American League last year. Only Oakland, with their minus 339 run differential in 2023, was worse than the White Sox. And here it's 838 for the runs allowed. And I've been wondering when I look at these projections that, to your point, Jim, they are pretty rosy for what I was thinking. Because right now for the betting folks, and I am a betting man, most sports books have the Chicago White Sox over under win total at 63.5 wins. And you got Baseball Prospectus and FanGraphs. They would recommend hit the over. We've simulated the season 1,000 times, and the over will hit more times than not. So hit the over. That's what Baseball Prospectus and FanGraphs say. But James, I'm wondering with these projections, like, okay, this is with Dylan Cease in tow, and the White Sox, of course, keeping everyone. This is like what it looked like if the roster stayed the same on opening day. If you could guess, like, what does this projection look like if the White Sox don't have Dylan Cease? Like, how many wins in the standings is Dylan Cease worth to the White Sox in 2024?
I mean, I guess the simple answer is like 3 to 4, right? Like, okay. That's probably what the WAR would stand up. But I think this one probably has the potential for a little bit of what's the word? Like reverberations beyond just like his raw production in the sense that, one of the reasons Dylan Cease has been very valuable, factoid from the article yesterday, is like he has the most starts in baseball the last 3 seasons. He's a compiler in that sense. Like, having some guy even who is, can be 5 and dive due to control efforts, every time out, getting like a non-terrible start pretty regularly every 5 days, that's valuable, especially when you have the depth issues of this team. So in a scenario where now you're kind of have to ride through Soroka or Schuster or somebody who, is kind of maybe doesn't have anything to prove in AAA, but you're kind of have to ride out with them in terms of figuring out what they can do in the majors through a really rough patch of results that you wouldn't have to otherwise. Maybe that can have larger effects where it becomes like a 5, 6, 7 sort of issue. Maybe it also has an issue of like not great for morale if the opening day starter gets like traded right before the season starts or something like that. Especially when there's some initial feeling of like, hey, we'll be all right on these starts. We'll be able to compete a little bit like Sale in 2013. We're like, well, or the team, you even see their defense probably perk up a little bit on those starts just because like they're locked in and they have a chance and they have a lot more at bats with runners on where they can actually have the opportunity to swing the game. Whereas like maybe runners in scoring position doesn't get the opposing pitcher as tight when it's like a 6-1 lead in the 5th inning. Maybe they're still attacking for stuff like that. So yeah, I think that probably has a opportunity to really swing the season. With covering the 2017 team, I just looked it up because right after they traded Jose Quintana, they had lost the game before the All-Star break, where Kyle Freeland almost no-hit them, but then they lost 8 more.
I was there.
Right. You could see like that trade deadline really kind of take that team apart in terms of like figuring out how they constructed for a little bit. If only because like they excavated their bullpen like any selling team does at that point. And, along with losing your most reliable innings starting pitcher, create a lot more pitching chaos where if they fell behind, the guys they'd have to throw out would turn close games into blowouts really quickly and take them out of it. So yeah, there could be a larger effect. I think as much as like this lineup doesn't excite us, the last 2 years of White Sox baseball have been some of the worst offenses in the league at the time. So I think the overriding logic was you had a team that sacrificed defense to try to squeeze more bats in and then couldn't hit anyway. And now you're just like, well, we'll stay the not hitting part, but now we'll actually not sacrifice defense for it.
Yeah, the offense can't perform. Well, I guess they could perform worse than they did last year, Jim. But I'm not expecting a big rebound offensively from the White Sox if they are going to surprise me. Because right now I would say, like my head says, take the under. Because last year after the trade deadline, what we saw from the White Sox was an 18-30 team. And if I don't think they're going to be better offensively, and if they're a little bit better defensively, I hope it's a lot better defensively. I mean, you're on pace to win between 55 and 60 games. Like, that's why I would say take the under. Like, I'm like maybe it's preparation. I'm preparing myself, Jim, to witness the worst win-loss season in my lifetime for the Chicago White Sox and one of the worst in franchise history. But if the defense does what Chris Getz is hoping for with these additions, and they could cut off 50 or 100 runs allowed from their total last year, is that the route? And is that the reason why they could surprise us and win more games than expected?
Yeah, thinking about it, like the 87 win team is probably like an exercise in irony, like James mentioned, with the team being built for defense and then somehow surpassing the offensive last year. And then you have like the bullpen being torn down and maybe outperforming the $40 million bullpen that Rick Hahn built. Like that would be what it would take, just completely showing the folly of the previous administration and both how they built their offense and their run prevention units. So I think that would be a hell of a treat, I think, to write about if that were somehow the case of just kind of George Costanza-ing their way through the season, just doing the opposite of what they thought they were doing the years before and getting by that way, to bring that up again. But when it comes to one factor I'm wondering about is, because this kind of came up with, previous conversation about Lenine Sosa, like Pedro Grifol getting mad about Lenine Sosa mistakes. And like he would get mad about rookie mistakes. He would get mad about Corey Lee losing the ball in the dusk on a weird pop-up that he didn't see off his bat, assuming it was foul. He'd get mad at like Oscar Colas for one of the many things that Oscar Colas did make people mad, but like everybody else, Tim Anderson making an error, bad base running by Benintendi, et cetera. He would keep his mouth shut and say like, oh, they're trying hard. So given how the team seemed to like shrug its shoulders at Griffols, he said the same thing over and over again every game, and just kind of went through a cycle of sound bites about flushing it and we will be better and we will hold people accountable, and nothing ever changed. Like another year of it, I wonder, maybe it's a younger roster or maybe a more, either a younger roster, more desperate roster to where like, nobody can afford to get on the manager's bad side. So maybe he has more leverage to put his stamp on the team. But if it carries over from last year and just like they're tuning him out in April again, I wonder how that affects the win-loss record, and just that everybody's kind of playing for themselves. Like, last year with Kelly and Graveman and such, Lynn, I think were the ones you could feel like were the ones leaking to national reporters about like, I wouldn't mind playing somewhere else. You could see that happening again. Like there's a whole lot of ways, given just how some of the stink from last year is carrying over without like a whole lot of tone change. There's not an entirely new front office. There's not an entirely new coaching staff, to where there just could be some leftover staleness, and Griffol's just incapable of getting through, and because he blew his chance last year at that, and now they're just all kind of waiting for the year to end, so maybe a managerial change can happen, and that could maybe just tack 5 losses onto it for if you want to throw a number on it.
Do you think that's something that Pedro's going to address next week when you're at camp, James? Like for him, he's got something to prove, because he had a job last year of, I'm going to help these core players for the White Sox bounce back to their normal selves. That did not happen. And instead we saw a 101 loss team. Like Pedro Griffol's got something to prove, right?
Yes. I think in terms of in inputting or installing a style of play that he talked about in spring, it didn't happen at all. It remained one of the sloppiest teams in baseball, and one of the reasons you probably have a new hitting operation is, and maybe one of the reasons there's upside, is like it's been the worst plate approach in baseball pretty much by any kind of macro things you want to look at. They lead the league in swinging out of the zone, they bottom of the league in walks, and lead the league in ground ball rate. So there's not as much potential to really probably damage the baseball. I think it's probably too far to say that they've really overhauled the offense in some way where you'd really expect some huge plate discipline jump. And it's definitely too soon to say like, just call Marcus Timms like a miracle worker off the jump and say that's going to radically change the plate approach, or that they've changed their hitting operation so drastically we're going to see some big payoff. But like, there is a lot of room for a not that talented group to theoretically perform up, or at least on the level of last year's team, because they were just killing themselves so severely with the swing decisions they were making. So if this team has just like a potential to be even average or below average, a little, just like a grade or two from the median as far as just like swing decisions and sticking to their offensive game plan in some way that all the preaching from last spring didn't translate into, there's obviously a potential to growth there, or at least hold the water offensively in some way. It's just that these are all concepts that were preached last season, and there was issues with how it was forced. It seemed like very selective at times, and we really saw like the public shaming element of it only come out for players that seemingly didn't have a standing, which made it all the more seemingly not necessary to do it publicly. But I think without some big reversal of last year's trends, where you had, there's 2 types of teams or 2 types of jobs managers get, or there's third where their team is actually good. But where you're either, supposed to turn around the performance of a proven group and you have the talent to do it, or you're given kind of a young team like this, a hunk of clay, and show that even if they're going to, get their heads kicked in a decent amount, you can instill a brand of baseball that lifts the group up, or is compelling, or shows confidence for going forward. So if he kind of flops on both types in successive years, I think that'd be very damaging for him. So I think he has a lot to prove. I'm sure he'll make reference to things that he's learned, how specific he'll get in the way that we can really hold on to and know it's going to be different. I think I doubt it'll be very specific. And if so, I think we'd all be like, all right, let's see how they actually play. Because last spring seemed really good and really crisp and really organized too, if a little vague, and we didn't get proof of concept.
Yeah, I like one of my favorite quotes. One of my favorite quotes in one of your stories I keep coming back to is Mike Tozar saying, "Our preparation will be elite." And now he's an assistant hitting coach after being like baseball handyman last year, like, well, do a little bit of everything. And now you're like, you're Howie Sparks.
I mean, I wonder if the role to kind of rove around, didn't stick as well with, a new team or a new organization where he doesn't have the standing with the players that he might have had when they gave him a more general roving role in Kansas City, and he had worked with like a bulk of those dudes in the minors. So I still think he's probably very top level in terms of who has at least Pedro's trust. And so I think he'd probably have a similar level of voice in the manager's room, if maybe not the same, necessarily like, savior organization wise, but maybe kind of the floating role of kind of giving him that status off the jump didn't work as well as they anticipated.
Well, let's move over to the most talked about topic. It's not the MLB standings, and unfortunately, it's not about the non-roster invitees, but instead it is the new South Loop renderings that Related Midwest has put out, and we have them on soxmachine.com for those listening to the podcast. Those watching the YouTube stream, you can see them on your screen and what Related Midwest has designed. And thanks to timestamps, they had some of these designs in mid-January, which lines up with the timeline that they were meeting with local aldermen. They met with the mayor's office to get their feedback about their idea, what they want to do in the South Loop for the Chicago White Sox. As the stadium renderings, Jim, they remind me a lot of Petco Park out in San Diego, especially with like the backdrop. And I wouldn't mind that. Like if the next White Sox stadium was like Petco Park, that would be pretty cool, which of course is one of the inner city stadiums in Major League Baseball, built in the 2000s. I think, what was it, 2007 that Petco was built. But there's also some nice images from Related Midwest and what it looks like looking from west to east towards the lake and how a new White Sox stadium would fit on this parcel of land. But I got a business opportunity for you, Jim, for Sox Machine. This is what we're going to do. We are going to find an open lot, buy this development, and we're going to turn it into a parking lot because I think we got a chance to make some serious coin. And you know what? Legal or not, doesn't matter. We're going to promote tailgating. So that way we get charged like $40 a game. So that'll be undercutting whatever parking would be underneath this new stadium. And people would be thrilled with us because they could still tailgate at the new stadium. I think this is like $100,000 a year idea, not $1 million, but we can make six figures.
I think
modest companies, modest goals.
Excise the phrase "legal or not" from the business pitch in most future meetings, even if I understand the spirit and momentum behind it.
Thank you. At least you understand the spirit.
We're workshopping here.
No, but with the renderings themselves in this grand idea right now, the Related Midwest is pitching. It looks cool, Jim.
Mm-hmm.
Did you have as far as any thoughts on like the stadium designs and what did you like? What you don't like? Because I know that there's been some clamoring for some nostalgia of like, can you incorporate some old Comiskey into a new stadium design?
It struck me as like Petco, like you said, like half Petco, half Target Field, kind of like the left field, the way kind of like angles in sharply, the city backdrop. Remind me a little bit of Target Field. Also, that's another stadium that does not have a whole lot of parking, or at least is not very parking forward. A lot of light rail going there. So like when you're approaching the stadium from various angles, you're not surrounded by lots and lots and lots. They're small lots, pay lots, but a lot of different ways and neighborhoods to get there. So it had that vibe as well, which I enjoyed. Like, I think the renderings themselves, I think it's more of like a use of the land because I don't think Related Midwest would be the ones drawing up the ballpark. I think that would be like HOK or Populous, whatever. I forget if HOK is like a Arma Populous or vice versa, but like they're pretty much the only company that designs ballparks. So I think it would be, you'd have them like establishing the land, the square footage or the acreage, and, roughly here's the space that's needed in order to have this kind of ballpark, major league standards, outfield, clubhouses, luxury suites, etc. And then like another company would come and actually design it. But it did feel like kind of like Petco, Target, like let's throw some pinwheels on there to make it White Sox. But I think if they're moving from Bridgeport to South Loop, I think it's drastic enough to where like you can probably part ways with everything that came before. And I saw that being a point of contention with, the designs and, arguments aside from parking. Parking was the big dividing line on White Sox Twitter when it came to screaming at each other and throwing things. But the other part was just, just whether it should be a new look or whether they should try to make it Comiskey Park again. But when you see all the glass skyscrapers around and like the high rises, it doesn't feel like Bridgeport. So it should probably be fitting in the neighborhood. And it's a new neighborhood, given that how little success the White Sox have experienced in the first 124 years of their operation. As much as we're comfortable with what the White Sox have been, like it hasn't done great for them. Everything the White Sox have been, like it hasn't, not a whole lot of success to the point to everything that they're known for nationally is kind of bad. So I think I don't mind a page turning or a chapter closing and starting a new one if they did pull this off. I think the uniform should be kept because those sell regardless of what team the White Sox put out there. But I think everything else can be like just representative of the new surroundings.
Yeah, James, I think Jim made a really good point, James. Something that I hadn't think about is like the lack of success that the White Sox have had at 35th and Shields. That maybe that's the biggest positive of this South Loop plan is you could start a new era, right? Because we're assuming a new era of White Sox baseball is coming in 5 years because the stadium lease expires.
I don't know. Eloy's in those graphics, man. It's
Eloy's going to stick around, man.
The whole
Michael Kopech is there. Yeah.
Eloy's hitting 50 homers this year, and they're going to pick up those contract options. And then, hey, listen, Jose Altuve keeps getting contracts with the Houston Astros. So somebody needs to be a lifer on this roster, James.
I didn't expect to see so many Edgar Navarros in the future renderings, but, clearly the path is laid.
Probably better fitting if they had Colson Montgomery, right? But I don't know if they have a Colson Montgomery White Sox pick. I mean, he played some spring training games last year, but that would probably be more fitting. But James, what do you think of the rendering so far and the idea of the White Sox kicking the tires, or at least Related Midwest trying to drag them along for this ride, possibly moving to the South Loop?
I mean, I guess I'd be remiss in discussing any new stadium action without being like, well, it seems like the actual financing of it and how it happens and how it's funded and the total cost, which I think sometimes floated as high as like potentially $1.5 billion, probably becomes the larger, more encompassing drama. But obviously, I think that they've been shifting the momentum, or at least really actively pushing the idea that they want a new stadium. And they're going to push to make it happen for almost a calendar year at this point. And I think what Jim is saying, I don't think they're excising like them as a South Side team, a smaller percentage of the population really engages with. While maybe a lot of us native Southsiders can look at that and say like that's their loss, and not really try to be open-minded about it in terms of like we need to court the downtown commuter crowd and get rid of parking and get rid leave the Bridgeport neighborhood. But I think they're probably viewing, especially with how successful they've been or lack thereof, that maybe this is something that will help them have a little bit bigger tent of who they pull in and who identifies as part of this team, that the people can feel like it's more connected to the middle of the city that they engage with. So yeah, there's potential there, but who's going to pay for it?
Well, yeah, to your point, the House Speaker, Emmanuel Welch, told the Chicago Sun-Times, quote, they did come up with a lot of pretty pictures that's being Related Midwest. They got people excited. Now they're going to have to answer the question of how they're going to pay for it. I would imagine they're going to have a menu of options they put out there because they know how this process works, end quote. And the Sun Times mentions that Illinois legislative, the session adjourns on May 24th. So related Midwest here between now and May 24th, if they want to get this on the docket, and they really want to move this like at a light speed pace, they got to figure out how the financing is going to work. And the Sun Times points out on just how much money the state still owes on Soldier Field, Jim. $589.1 million is still owed on Soldier Field, and those bonds will not retire into 2032. And I wonder, on a political point, if like the White Sox or related Midwest trying to make this pitch, it's like the government saying, well, if we say yes to you, then we have to say yes to the Bears, in which they want or pitching a stadium idea back on the lakefront. So that would be pretty intriguing conversation. But related Midwest also had ideas for Bridgeport. So this is where I have to give credit to this real estate developer.
You're hustling.
I'm sorry?
They're hustling.
They are hustling. Yeah. I mean, there is a way of saying, hey, Bridgeport, we're thinking of you too. So we came up with some designs just in case if you want to sell the parking lots to us, we could also develop the area around Guarantee Rate Field. And in their mock-ups, they are remodeling Guarantee Rate Field, what it looks like to be a soccer stadium, maybe one for the Chicago Fire, the Chicago Red Stars for both the men's and women's side. And taking the parking lots that are south of the stadium, so this is by the 37th Street and Pershing, and turning that into a residential area as far as building new single-family homes, more townhomes, more apartments. For those that are familiar with the Donovan Park area of Bridgeport now, there are a lot of single-family homes and townhouses as well. A lot of that new development since 2016. So, yeah, like to your point, related Midwest is hustling here, and the White Sox have found a partner, Jim, that is doing the grunt of the work. And I think that's the biggest story here. We really haven't heard from the Chicago White Sox about this possibility. Everything is still coming from related Midwest. And we talked about that in a previous podcast episode. And I think it's even more clear now. This is absolutely perfect for Jerry Reinsdorf, right? How little money that he could spend, how little money he can invest, and how little work that he could do. Man, he found his partner, and that's related Midwest.
Yeah. I guess maybe the reason why I'm not hung up on who's paying for it or, who's paying for what is one, I'm not Illinois taxpayer. There's that, but also, the White Sox haven't, like, as you mentioned, been doing any of the talking. They're not driving any demands. They're not like doing any John Fisher plays with Oakland, Las Vegas and trying to
keeps getting worse.
They're not sticking their necks out there. So it's like, I guess my jurisdiction is writing about the White Sox and following them is like, if they're going along for the ride on like a real estate scheme, kind of where it's just like, hey, if you want to like live in this house that we're going to buy and we're going to like establish residency there, but you don't have to pay rent. You just have to live there and accept the mail. Like, that's kind of what it feels like the White Sox are doing. It's just like, well, they're not going to be the ones, like owning the lease. So they're not going to be legally in trouble if some of this falls apart. So like right now they haven't been liable, it seems, for anything being floated out there. They're happy to be associated with it. They're happy to see, I think, after the last time they went through it in the 80s with, using St. Petersburg as leverage and all of the bad will that generated. And then like also South Loop was in play, briefly there with Harold Washington during his tenure, like where, maybe there is a case of Reinsdorf thinking like, maybe we should have pushed harder for that, or maybe we should have done more to make that happen. Here's an opportunity for that experiment to play out again. It turns out that, casino wasn't built there and everything else has fallen apart. So sure, I will make myself available to it. I'm not going to put any of my money towards it or pledge any money towards it until I absolutely have to. And maybe not even then. But right now he has not been required to speak. The White Sox haven't been required to speak aside from saying, yeah, we're interested or we're open to ideas. And so like, until it gets that point, I don't think you can fault them for going along for the ride. They're not, until they start making promises or until they start making demands or start using like saying Guaranteed Rate Field is crumbling and they, they cannot afford to, host a major league franchise there any longer, then you can roll your eyes and say, where are you going to go? But I think at this point, sure, go along with Related Midwest's scheme because it's not costing them anything. They still have their home for as long as they have it. Like it's not like the Bears where they're kind of like dangling, cutting their lease and buying land and then going. So I mean, like they have not done anything to jeopardize their own position. They're just seeing if this goes anywhere. It's kind of like almost like a fling in a way. Just it's kind of interesting. Wasn't expecting this. I got nothing better to do for the next 2 years, before it really gets serious when it comes to a stadium. So yeah, maybe this turns into something.
Yeah. A reminder, because I went down the rabbit hole to get like more details and educate myself. In the last annual report that the Illinois Sports Facility Authority posted was after the 2022 year. The White Sox still have about $42.5 million of the bond that they got in 2003 to renovate the stadium. If you remember, they did that for the All-Star game, and renovations went into the 2004-2005 season. So a much lower number than what the Chicago Bears and Soldier Field still have to pay for. It's a crazy high number for the Bears. To me, that's a non-starter conversation, but it's the NFL, and they're looking to build an 80,000 seat domed stadium that could promise Super Bowls and national championships. So we'll see if that entices other politicians in the state.
I know.
Taylor
I felt
Swift
validated.
residencies.
I felt validated when I read the Sun-Times article about how much the Bears was still out in the Bears Stadium, because my 8th grade Chicago Metro History Fair project was about the renovation plans and how it cost too much public money. I was a very severe child, and I did not win because I did not have enough colors on my display board.
What? That's ridiculous.
It was huge blocks of text. It was just very like blogging 1.0. They weren't about it. I wasn't engaging my readers.
Yeah. 8th grade James Fegan called this out, man. He knew that this was a problem, and still is a problem. No, it's good to hear from Illinois politicians to maybe kind of pump the brakes, because it has been like moving along pretty quickly. Related Midwest has done a very good job as far as promoting this project and gaining excitement. I think for the most part on Twitter, there's a lot of excitement. For someone that lives in Bridgeport, I would be heartbroken. And I've got a lot of questions of, okay, if the White Sox do move to the South Loop, what are you doing? Because I don't want to live next to an empty stadium with seas of parking lots. It just seems like wasted land in the city of Chicago. But we still got ways to go. And one thing that really did catch my attention when I went down this rabbit hole, like public transportation has been talked a lot about this location. And like Roosevelt, through October 2023, the last report from the CTA had 1.9 million riders boarding the Red Line Roosevelt train. For Sox on 35th, 618,000. So there's like 3 times more foot traffic, at least at the Roosevelt train stop, like actual data, than Sox on 35th. But I had no idea. Like, obviously COVID severely impacted ridership in public transportation across the world, but it has not come anywhere close on Sox 35th, a rebounding pre-COVID levels, where in 2019, for those listening to the podcast, it was almost 1.4 million people took the L at Sox 35th. Through October of 2023, just 618,000. And in 2022, 669,000. Now, I've only lived in Bridgeport since March 2021, but it feels like everyone stopped taking the train and everyone is driving. So again, back to my business plan. We should buy and develop a parking lot. Like, that's what we should do to take care of all the White Sox fans, the season ticket holders, and the other ticket package holders from Bridgeport, Canaryville, back of the yards, McKinley Park, because it's pretty clear on the data. They're not taking the train. They're going to be driving.
I was going to go gondola.
Gondola. There you go. Get a boat. Yes.
I mean, it feels like correlation without necessarily causation. I mean, it could be COVID that's a drop off. It could be the departure of Wellington Castillo, cutting fan interest, possibly like more than in half in force. I think that could be looked into as just as much as
You make a good point. We'll investigate further at soxmachine.com. And what better way of using Patreon resources to do an investigation? How did Wellington Castillo impact Sox on 35th?
Science fair board.
Science fair board.
I'll
That's right.
back off. It's got to be in my mother's basement somewhere.
I'm going to compete against 8th grade James Fegan, but I'm going to beat you because I'll have more colors. So that's you already gave me the secret. But speaking of the Patreon level of support, again, with James coming on board since Monday, and again, this week has felt like a month. It's been a fantastic experience, and it's wonderful to see the immediate support by everyone at patreon.com/Sox Machine. Thank you guys so much for your support. And again, we have monthly plans starting at $5. James will be at spring training camp when it starts next week in Arizona. So that type of coverage will be for our Patreon supporters. So we've already got great feedback already. And again, thank you guys so much for your messages and your emails and the comments on soxmachine.com about how excited that you are that James Fegan is part of the staff. You could gain full access to Sox Machine coverage starting at $5 a month. And we also have additional tiers of support where you get more. So if you enjoy our work and you want more, you get more at patreon.com/Sox Machine. Also, don't forget about our live podcast, Opening Day Eve at the Remova Theater on Wednesday night, March 27th. Doors open at 7 o'clock. We're planning to have the show start at 8 o'clock. It'll be a very fun time. We'll be there. Our friends from the 108, our good friend Lawrence Holmes from 6 Save the Score will be stopping by as well, and give an opportunity for everyone to check out the Remova Theater for the first time. You can buy tickets at removachicago.com. Again, that is removachicago.com to buy your tickets, and they're currently $23 right now, and they'll be $25 at the door if you decide to come. Again, that is Wednesday, March 27th. Doors open at 7 o'clock. The show will start at 8 p.m. for our Opening Day Eve live podcast. Sox Machine Live is a production of SoxMachine.com, your home for all things Chicago White Sox baseball. Alongside Jim Margulis and James Fegan, I'm Josh Nelson. Thanks for watching and listening.